I hope I will show you some basics on hair tool, so you will learn the procedural part in here, so mostly about the hair system, which is built usually from the setup section, where the hair mesh from which the hair grow, it can be linked with guide curves. Then often you have the hair systems, which are basically modifiers, where the curves are generated and then modified. And after those hair systems, we get the profile, where the curves receive the mesh and UV and material. And optionally, you can also add ambient occlusion generator. There are also the non-procedural parts to the add-on, for example, the selection groups, the bone and jiggle generator. There is also the hair operation sections. Some of those operations are for the destructive version of the deformers. Then we have the hair drawing functionality, the baking setup for texture making, and library of presets. Now I will show you what is happening when you add hair system to this scalp mesh, for example. Now use Ctrl-Shift-H and add hair system, Strand Generator. You will see a bunch of hair cards spawned. You can change the length in here, change the density, basic stuff. But what I wanted to show is what is happening in the background, so you get better understanding how everything works. If I go to modifiers, you see a bunch of those were added. The first one, setup section, currently is we use no guide curve and no source surface. Source surface is empty because we added hair system to mesh, so I don't will know to use that mesh for spawning hair cards. Usually you do not have to do anything in the setup section, and it can be also accessed from the menu panel in here. This is useful for example, transferring hair system. If I did not have this modifier, I could not move the hair system from the mesh, for example, to empty curve. I can show you how it works. I can use Ctrl-Shift-H, transfer hair system to empty curve, and now in the outliner you see the active object is curve type, and this is now separate from the mesh. And this is possible thanks to this setup modifier. Now you see the source mesh is no longer empty, and without it, if I remove it, you see the hair cards would not know from which mesh they should be spawned from. The second modifier is for generation of the actual strands. If I go to panel hair system subsystems, you see the name in here. For example, if I name this QQQ, this is just name of the modifier. If I hide it, it hides the modifier. And we can add various effects inside this modifier in the Deformers sections. First one is always responsible for strand generation parameters, so the length and the density. But you can add a bunch of modifiers, for example, the noise, the radius set for tapering, and others. Now we can also add another generator on top, so let's add one more strand generator, and you see it is just creating another modifier, and it is generating new strands. So you can adjust maybe length. We have two hair systems attached to the object, and they are attached to this empty curve. So in the strand generation we have just length and density control, but sometimes you will see way more options if the parent tag is set to something other than this one. This tag basically means there is no parent, but let's change this to, for example, A, and now you see new options appeared. The tag is the basically alias you can give to the strands. And currently we have no strands with this alias. So let's assign a tag to the first hair system. Now the strands that are generated in first hair system receive a tag, and thus the second system sees the A strands from the first system. And now you see the interpolation works. Basically, without interpolation, we have straight strands. And then after linking the first and second system with a tag, we can use interpolation. But let's keep this simple, so I will unlink those. After a bunch of strand generators, we can then mesh them with the profile modifier. The same properties can be accessed from the profile section in here, and in the profile, the hair curves receive the mesh, they receive material and UVs. Maybe in this case I will show you the UVs. So go to the UV image editor, and in the top header bar click hair UV, and it will show you something like that. This is the default UV layout and default texture that is used in hair tool. And you can move them around, click by the corner to resize, X to delete, and if you want to save, then press enter. You see the hotkeys on the bottom. In my case, I will right click to cancel. And those UVs are stored inside this object. So if you, for example, do not want to draft all those UVs again, just copy this from one hair object to different object, and the UV shape will be automatically transferred. And maybe I will now show you the material. So if I switch to shader editor, I have made a simpler version of the shader. So let's use this one, and it is using the texture from the left. And I will load this in the shader editor. The only basic thing you need to know about the default hair tool material is that the most important part is this. Basically, when you have your texture, it has to be linked to this hair tool UV node. Without it, UVs just won't work. Usually, this will result in the hair being transparent. And this texture is then usually plugged into the hair shader. I kept this simple, but for the real hair tool material, I will show you it is a bit more complicated, but we have the same UV node, then we have the texture, and it goes to the hair shader. But that is not that important right now, and maybe let's go to the profile. So we have the flat profile currently assigned to the generated curves. You can switch this to any other type. For example, we could use a circle profile, and I will reduce the width like 10 times. And maybe you can see that those are basically now circles. So I can increase the profile resolution to make it more round. And this looks like so. So you have option to choose various profiles like curls, braids, and such. Now the one thing about the UVs, the UV data object holds the shape of the UVs, but it is not telling which strand should receive which UV box from the left. To do this, you actually have to go to the hair system, and for example, for the second one, maybe for the first one, let's go to the Deformers and to the UV region distribute. This is where the strands receive UV box. So for example, now it is using all UV regions, but I can manually set UV region and pick maybe one of the boxes by left clicking. Or I can just shift click to select multiple regions like so. Enter to accept. And that is basically how the hair system setup is done. So we have the setup section where the guides and source mesh is defined. We have the strand generators. Then we have the profile where the material and UVs and the curves are meshed. Now I will show you how different hair system types work. So let's start by Strand Generator. I already showed you a few times how to use it. The more interesting thing is how to guide this. First I will show you the long and wrong way. I will hide the hair system. Let's go to the hair drawing, enable that button. Then when you have your mesh selected, hold D, left click and drag, hold D, left click and drag, and we will use those as the guides for the hair system. Currently this will be seen from other mesh as mesh, since the profile was attached with the flat type. So instead I will switch to no profile so that other object will see this as curve. I will also remove the material because the hair material attached to no profile will make it disappear in the solid view, in the material view. Let's go back to the plane and unhide the hair system. And we want to use those guides. For that, let's go to the hair system setup and let's pick the curves we just created. Now those curves receive this guide tag. Let's copy this tag and paste into the hair system parent. Now this is still not working because the interpolation may be disabled, so enable interpolation, and it is still not working. There is this button that tells you that there is possible cyclic dependency. The idea is that the curve is dependent on the plane, and on the plane we have hair system that is depending on the drawn curve. So there is indeed cyclic dependency, and the fix is to transfer hair system. So transfer hair system from the mesh to the guide curve. And now the interpolation works, but it is quite complicated and lots of steps. So instead, what I prefer to do, and the fastest way, is to just enable hair drawing, draw a few strands, and then add hair system to it, and that's it. There is also a slightly slower but cool way if I delete the hair system. I also sometimes like to add the strand generator, make this maybe more uniform, like that. And then I usually would like to bake this into real curve geometry and use as guide. So if I search for bake option, it is disabled because the hair system is attached to mesh and you cannot bake curve to mesh. So again, let's transfer hair system from the plain mesh to empty curve. Okay. And now the bake should work. And we can now move the strands. Okay, so now just add hair system, strand generator, and it will be guided by the hair system that we baked into geometry. The strand generator has few options. One of them is use mesh island splits. So right now it is doing nothing. But if I go to the plane and cut it into two halves like that, so you have two mesh islands. Now the use mesh island splits, you see it works. And the idea is it can be used for guiding for creating hairstyle with split basically. And there is a tip I can give you. If you want quickly to select guides from one island, go to the selection groups, use the pick by island, and then left click on one of the islands, and it will select the strands from that island. Another option in here is align to surface normal. It would be easier to see on the sphere. So let's draw one guide strands. And now if I add hair system to it, so this is how it looks with the align to surface normal option enabled, and then without and with. So this can be especially useful for shorter hairstyles. And lastly, in here we used the external curve guide, but the hair system can be guided by another hair system guide. So basically we have two hair systems in here, longer and shorter. And for the longer I can assign L tag, and in the shorter I will use the L tag as parent. And you see the shorter strands are now interpolated toward the longer ones. So the Strand Generator hair system type is the most versatile. You can use this for short hair like here, for medium length of hair like this, or for the longer hairstyles also. Now I will show you how to use the Strands filter. So in here I have a long hair system and short. I want to taper them. Normally I would have to add the radius set one by one to each of them, but I can add just Strands filter and then add radius set, and it will taper both of them at once. Now the order of this matters. So if I move the Strands filter up, you see it will affect only what is above it. So only long hair strands will be tapered now. Another case when it can be useful, for example, if I draft a bunch of strands and I want to add some effect on to this, I can add strands filter on top of those strands, and then maybe let's add the curls. I will reduce the global size, and we do not have enough resolution in the painted strands. So in the filter, I will enable resample affected strands, increase subdivision until we have enough resolution. And this can be useful, for example, in this hairstyle. What I did is I added a strands filter to modify all previously generated hair strands. So in this case, I added noise on top of those previously generated strands. Then I added mirror on top of that to make this noisy hair symmetrical. And to break the exactly perfect mirror, I added another noise on top. And the idea is now that by going to the first noise, I can change maybe the seed and change the hair look quickly. So maybe I could change frequency, and by changing seed, I can get a slight variation for the hairstyle without spending too much time on modeling this. I will show you now the favorite technique, the curve strands from grid surface. So when I add this to the plane, currently it is complaining no edge marked as sharp or creased. So let's go to edit mode, select the border edge, Ctrl E, mark sharp, and now you see the strands are spawned correctly, but we have Z-fighting. So I will remove the hair system, and instead let's add this using Ctrl-Shift-H, curve from grid surface. So it is similar to the previous method, except now you see the base plane is rendered in the wire mode. If you want to change this, go to Object Properties, Viewport Display, and you can change this in here. Just enable ray visibility. The settings for the strands from grid are quite simple. You can increase subdivision step, so the strands will receive more points. You can adjust the strand count, the normalization for strand count to see how it works. I will duplicate the plane in the edit mode. And now you see with normalization, smaller island receives less strands. Without normalization, both will receive 9 strands. Placement mask, it will remove random points like so. Then you have uniform point spacing. I will show this in the solid view, maybe with darker matcap. So with uniform point spacing, we get uniform spacing, but when I disable that, you see the points are sliding to the bottom. They are sliding to the bottom because the guide mesh is more densely subdivided in the bottom also. And similar parameter for uniform strand spacing. So this time pay attention that the guide mesh is more subdivided when we go to the right. And when I disable uniform strand spacing, you see the strands go to the right. And if I add, for example, extra loop on the left, you see more strands were placed on the left. You can randomize spacing with the seed value. If you want, you can use crease edge rather than sharp edge. And to show you how the hook first segment works, I will modify the grid mesh. So let's say it looks like that. And now you see the grid mesh is going to the top like that, but the curve is a bit too smooth. And let's now enable the hook first segment. So with the hook first segment, now the curve will follow more closely the sharp edge segment. This is helpful if you want to embed hair tips into the character head. And that's basically it. Those are all the parameters. Maybe I will show you how I would usually use this. So usually I would create a first layer like this one, except with the denser texture. So I would use more dense texture spot and fill the whole character scalp geometry. So this way it will cover the character head. But this is too like solid looking and flat and boring. So usually I would add one more layer, strands from grid surface. And the second layer is exactly on top, overlapping the previous one. So I would add the move out of the surface, push out deformer. So you see now the second layer is elevated to the top. You can make this slightly better looking, by example, by randomizing the push out. So we have this wavy look. And the second layer, I want to make it more softer looking, so I would pick different region on the texture. So I would put maybe second and third one like so. Then maybe I would add a bit of noise on top. You can add as many modifiers as you want. And after playing with the settings, it would help to get a softer look. So first layer would cover the head, and second is there to make the hair look softer. Maybe a bit hard to see, but in here I have example. So this is the first base layer, kinda uniform and boring, and the second layer on top to make it softer. And if I show you the base mesh, so this is basically torus from which the strands are spawned around like so. And similar technique is used in the center. So we have the base layer, again flat and boring, and then it is covered by two more layers like so. And if I show you maybe the grid guide, you can see it is basically half of circle with the mirror modifier for the other side. And the sharp edge is in here, and it is pathing strands in this direction. And same technique for the fringe. We have the grid guide with sharp edge here, and strands are growing to the bottom. So as you can see, you can create various hairstyles with this technique. Now I will show you the last version of the hair system, the Interpolated Strands. This works only on real curve geometry. So let's go to hair drawing, enable drawing, then hold D, left click and drag. And we will draw a bunch of strands like so. Now I can add the Interpolated Strands hair system. You can see a bunch of new curves were generated. Basically, this works in the same way as curve from grid geometry, except in there we used the helper mesh. The settings also are quite similar, so I won't go over that. Instead, I wanted to show you the operator version of this tool. In here we have the hair system attached to mesh, and I want to fix those empty spots in the front of the hairline. I will use Ctrl-Shift-H, and I will bake the hair system into real geometry. Now I will select the good looking hair cards in front, so those one, and use Ctrl-Shift-H, Interpolate Strands operator. You can adjust the amount of generated strands. I will set uniform spacing, and after that I want to align tilt, so Ctrl-Shift-H, align curve tilt, and we basically fixed the hairline. However, this is the destructive operator, so no longer I can adjust the amount of the generated strands. Okay, so there is another way to generate hair cards that is not listed in here. I have this plane. Let's cut and rip this edge in the center. Now I will use the magic technique, Ctrl-Shift-H, hair with track mesh. And in the pop-up, you can adjust the initial offset. This is basically applying displace modifier to the guide mesh. And I recommend to apply this after you like the offset. So the idea is that this operation just duplicated mesh below, move at this and push it outside and set it to wireframe mode. Now when I move this mesh, you see the hair tips are glued to this guide mesh. So the idea is that we can edit the hair cards by editing this guide mesh. The setup is done from and made from the Strand Generator. So I will increase maybe density and tweak the settings. So profile is bit dark. I will switch to brighter material. Then I will switch to Poisson disk sampling to get more uniform distribution. And okay, so this is the Strand Generator. Maybe I will use different texture spots. So I will use second and third, since they are more softer looking texture places. And now you see there is also this track deformer. This is where the hair cards become, hair tips become glued to the guide mesh. So it will be set up for you. And so the idea is that instead of like maybe going and editing this guide mesh in the edit mode, you can go to sculpt mode, switch to the best brush ever for that, nudge brush, and now when I sculpt this around, it will look like I am grooming the hair cards. So now you may be asking why this is like any good, this technique. Maybe it will be just better to create guide curves and guide the strands with the guide curves rather than this guide mesh. Well, the thing is, I tried to use guide curves for those eyebrows. Now, even though if I tried to make them very nice and smooth, it would still not result in nice, smooth, generated hair cards. Not sure why, maybe it is because the Blender curve interpolation is not the best, but anyway, when I used this technique with the guide mesh, it was giving me, not only it was easier and faster to make, but also the hair cards were like nicely distributed without too much twisting. They were just smooth and good looking. So it was also faster and resulted in better hair cards distribution. And if you do not like this very uniform look, you can always add more deformers on top. So after the track deformer, I can add a bit of noise, reduce the global size, reduce the amplitude like that, maybe add a bit of taper with the radius set deformer, and the whole workflow is done on the shape keys. So remember that when I told you to apply the offset, it created this shape key guide displays, and you see we are sculpting basically on this shape key. So if by any chance you mess up your guide mesh, make this mangled and deformed like that, you can always just remove this shape key, create new one, and work on the new version. And this technique is actually give the best results on the shorter hairstyles, so something like that, or the eyebrows, or actually facial hair for male also was giving me better results than using curves. This technique can be a bit more complicated if you go into more detail, but I just wanted to explain that it is existing here and you can use it. Now I will show you how to use the input masks. So basically next to each input, for example in here for the noise amplitude, you will see pop-up menu, and we can mask this noise amplitude, for example with the vertex group. So let's plug the vertex group I just created earlier. I will show you how it looks. So basically this is just gradient, and now you see the amplitude is masked with this gradient. We get stronger noise on the right. It will be easier to see the effect on the other deformer, so I will disable noise and enable color set. This is basically just adding color on top of diffuse. So you can change the hue, you can change the saturation, and change the value or brightness. And the brightness would be the best in this case to see the effects. So let's again add vertex group to mask the brightness. Now you get this kind of effect. There is option to invert that with the button in here. Other input masks, my favorite is the randomize. So let's add this and add the current value 0.5. It will randomize brightness, so from maximum value 1 up to 50% of brightness. If I increase randomization range, you see this is getting stronger. So now the darker strands will receive value 0. There is the randomization variance slider. For low values, we get this kind of effect. For higher values, we get this kind of effect. And that you can also put multiple masks on top of each other. So let's go back and disable randomization, enable vertex group, and now let's add the offset gain on top. This is, in this case, basically working as brightness contrast. So when I increase the gain, you will have kind of effect of higher contrast and sharper transition. And when I adjust offset, it is basically changing like the brightness. If this was applied for the noise, you would see just stronger noise where we have the brighter strands. And let's see how now it would look like if we enable the randomization in between. So now this is a bit strong. So let's adjust randomization. Without randomization, we get this smoother transition. Then when I increase randomization, we get this kind of more textured look to this effect. And maybe I will disable vertex group now, and let's bump up randomization. So now we get this kind of effect where, because of the quite high value of contrast, the strands will receive brightness of 1 or 0 without too many in-between values like 0.5, because the contrast is basically squashing everything to 0 and 1. And if I adjust the offset, you see we get only few bright strands. If you imagine this being applied to the noise, we would get lots of noise only for few strands, and this would be basically good for the flyaway effect strands. Another interesting input mask is in the edge mask, border edge distance. Let's set the range to 2 centimeters, and basically it will mask based on the distance to border. So on the border, the distance is 0, so the mask is 0. Around 2 centimeters from border, in here we have the maximum value for the mask. Quite often you want to invert this effect, so this way the affected strands will be the ones that are close to border in this 2 centimeter range. There are other types of input masks. You can read about them in documentation, but I wanted to show you just the special case of influence input types. So in this case, in the radius set, we are tapering the radius with this influence input. Basically, it allows us to mask the strand along the length. So you can imagine the mask being 1 on the root, 0 on the center, 0.5 in the center, and 0 on the tip. And this is using the simple input mask. So you can change this like so. We can invert this effect, or you can switch to constant value to disable this effect. You can switch to quadratic curve. In this case, you have control over the root, center, and the tip. If you imagine this being applied to the noise, it would mean we get full noise only in the center. And the last type is profile curve. In which here you can fully control exact shape of the curve with the shape in here. Now I will go into a bit more detail about the UVs and how to manage them. So as I explained previously, UV data is held inside the profile in this object, but you do not edit this object directly. Instead, you go to UV image editor, and in the top header bar, click the hair UV. Then you can move your mouse over a box, X to delete existing ones, or you can grab the corner of existing box and resize it like so. You can left click and drag to create new box, or use Shift D to duplicate. You get all the list of hotkeys on the bottom. So let's duplicate one more time. We have 4 boxes, and enter to save. And now basically we have 4 UV boxes, and the shape is stored inside the profile in this object. But to assign those UV regions per strand, you do this actually in the deformers in UV region distribute. So you can add that if you don't have UV region distribute, but usually add-on will add this deformer automatically. So we are using all UV regions, but you can manually pick ones with this button. And then we can pick maybe like the red region, enter to save. Now let's say we want to add a different color on the right. For that we can add one more time UV region distribute. And you see it overrides the UVs from above. And I will manually pick the green UV region. And lastly, we want to put this only on the right, so we can use the mask. I use vertex group mask, and you see now the green UVs are now overridden and used only on the right side. If you want a slightly more organic transition, you could add, for example, randomize on top to make this transition more like textured. Or for example, if we want to apply UVs only to the longer strands, we can add the length mask, and now the green UVs will be applied only to the longer strands. Okay, so let's say you want to apply maybe green UV, but only to the single strand. Currently, you cannot select those since this is all procedurally generated. So for full manual control, you would want to bake all hair system, so Ctrl-Shift-H, bake. And now if you switch to hair tool modeling, you will be able to select the individual hair cards. And when you have those selected, you can press Ctrl-Shift-H, set UV regions. And then you can pick, for example, a green box or blue, however you like. And for example, I can select the bottom part, Ctrl-Shift-H, set UV region, and maybe pick this time blue and purple with shift-click, enter to save. At any time, if you have real curve geometry like so, and maybe you do not want to manually assign UVs, you can always go to hair systems, add Strand Filter, and automatically you see UV region distribute was added, and it has overridden the existing manually created UVs. So at any time, if you want, you can override the UVs in the procedural way with Strand Filter. Now I will show you how to copy hair system settings and profile between objects. So we have 5 objects in here, and they are made from few hair systems. And the last one is the type of strand filter, meaning it will affect all previously generated strands. In this case, it is tapering the strands and randomizing the length. So when I adjust maybe the trim value, you see all other objects are changing. This is because this hair system is shared between 5 objects, and you can see this by number 5 in here. Or if I made the UI wider, you see 5 objects are using the same hair system, which is basically the same modifier. Now, if I want to modify only one of those objects, I can press number 5 here or here. And now if I adjust the trim value, only this one will be updated. Now let's say I want to copy those settings to object next to it. I can select object, select the hair system, and from the pop-up menu select copy, active subsystem settings. Now go to the target object, select the hair system you want to override, and select paste into active subsystem settings. And now number 2 is shown here, so 2 objects share the same hair system, so I can adjust one of them and both will be updated. The same thing is true about the profiles. So number 5 in here shows us that 5 objects are using the same profile. So when I change one, all of them change. If I want to change one of them, I would click number 5 here or here to make this hair system unique. Then I could make this into a flat profile, and now only this one will change. And just like previously, I can use the copy profile settings, select other hair object, paste profile settings, and now they will share the same parameters. Now I will show a tiny bit about the hair shader. So it comes with this node in here. You can adjust in here the basic settings, like you can see in other applications. So you can change the highlight color, specular roughness. You can change the base hair color like that. You can change the root mix factor. This will basically create gradient in the roots. Then you can offset this root color and change it to something maybe bluish, like so. There is also separate control for tip gradient. So tip color mix like so. You can also change its color and change its offset, so it happens only on the tips. Then there is the debug mix color. This is for the debug color input. So currently it is connected to this system color attribute. So when I mix that, it is getting reddish, since we have the color set deformer with this reddish color. I can make it like more yellowish, and you see with this debug color mix, we can mix this yellow color. Depth mix factor. If I show you maybe the diffuse texture, RGB channels, we have basically depth pass baked into the RGB channel for the texture. And you can see the node in here. So we can mix this depth texture into diffuse with the depth mix factor. So with high value, we will get more detail in the hair strands. When I set this to 0, they look quite flat. And you can tint this depth also to make it maybe warmer, like so. There is also ambient occlusion vertex color mix, but now it is black, since the vertex color ambient occlusion input is connected to the attribute which is black. To fix that, you can use Ctrl-Shift-H, generate ambient occlusion, and it will just add modifier that will generate ambient occlusion. Just note it is quite expensive to compute, so you may want to disable this modifier if you want for when you edit hair strands. And then before export, enable this ambient occlusion, and then you can just mix this into the diffuse with the vertex color AO mix. And you can also tint this ambient occlusion if you want. The alpha strand, when I lower that, it will make the hair look softer or harsher. Alpha diffuse mix. So the alpha channel looks like so. And if you want, you can mix this into diffuse. So it will be slightly more like defined, the hair strands. You can change the subsurface scale. And then we have this metallic color. So I can make it brighter, like that, and we get this kind of metallic highlights. And we can change the roughness for that. And the tangent frequency, basically if I set the tangent roughness to 0, you will get very smooth highlight like so on each hair card. If I increase the tangent roughness, then these highlights will get more like zigzaggy, like so. And the amount of those zigzags is basically defined by tangent frequency. So if I set this to lower value, then it will be kinda smoother. And hair bump is adding a bit of bump effect to the hair strands. And that's it. So we basically have this shader that is connected to the texture. The texture is made from alpha channel, and the RGB channel has the depth map inside it baked. And we have a bunch of other inputs that are described in the documentation, but few of them I can show you. The ambient occlusion I just showed you previously. The factor random attributes are automatically generated, and you have also sampled UVs and sampled color attributes. For that to work, you would have to go to the profile other section and plug in the UVs and vertex color you want to sample. And when you sample, they will be available from those attributes. And system color, I already mentioned, is generated in the color set Deformer. Now I will show you how to bake new textures and load them to your character. So from the hair bake panel, use the import baking scene. You will see pop-up. This will import baking hair scene into current file. Accept. Wait a few seconds until the scene is loaded. And this is the place where your texture hair strands will be baked. You can preview the bake result on the right in here. And you see the new scene was loaded. Rather than using the scene, swapping scene in here, I would suggest you use the button in the hair bake. On the bottom there is switch to main scene. This will preserve the viewport drawing and display modes. And from your main scene, you can switch to baking scene now with this. So you see we are on baking scene. Okay, so the setup is not that complicated. I just set output path. Whenever you want, you can change the name of the bake. So AAA, for example, resolution, quality, and such. The collection, bake collection. So this is the collection that will be rendered into the bake. So hair for bake, it is this collection. So everything that is inside will be baked if it is enabled. The setup you see right now, it is the same as the default hair material is using. So let's swap this. I will swap this to different collection and use this for baking. And maybe I will show you the bake passes quickly. In the rendered mode, we have the ambient occlusion, diffuse, opacity, the normal, root, random ID, random parent, random color, flow, directional, and depth pass. The depth pass can be driven with this empty. So in the outliner you see the depth driver. If you move this up or down, it will change the depth look. And the minimal setup I like to use is opacity and depth. So I will just shift click on opacity, and those two passes will be baked automatically. And for channel packing, I recommend using this button. So if you enable that, you will be able to pack depth pass into RGB and alpha, bake this into alpha channel. So just press bake, wait a few seconds, and it should be done. And it's done. We can see the output and result on the left. I will go back to the EV viewport. Now this does not look the best, since there is no normal map bake, so it is looking a bit weird. I will disconnect the normal, and now it is slightly better. Also, the UVs are now not in sync with this layout, so we will have update the UVs. Let's load the texture we baked, a opacity, and just as a reminder, the UVs are stored in the profile in this object. So let's edit the UV layout. In the top header bar for the image, select Hair UV button. I will press X and remove a bunch of those old UV boxes. Resize those one. I will just make this quick, but I want to use all the regions. So just left click and drag to define UV region, or you can Shift D to duplicate existing one, like so. And scale index if you want. Enter to accept. And now the layout looks better since we fixed the UVs. And in the material, you see we have all the textures, and from all those passes we bake currently only depth and only opacity. So you see those images are loaded into the nodes. We did not bake like ID root, and so they are empty. The depth pass goes into this mix node, and to the bottom input, the factor for multiply is 0, so we do not see any depth on the strands. That's why it is a bit flat. So let's increase the depth mix factor, and now you see the depth pass is mixed and then loaded into the diffuse. So now it is just matter of loading those two textures to the character, and also we have to load the new UV layout. I do not want to do the UVs again, so I will just copy this object and paste this into the character hair. Okay, so let's go back to the hair scene. From hair bake, go and switch to main scene with the button. And let's start maybe by, and I forgot something, let's switch to the main scene, to the baking scene again. So I told you to use the mix baked channel. This is for channel packing. We used this option, and now, so thanks to that, we can go to texture channel mixing, and in here you will see this node setup. Very simple in here. So the idea is we can load the depth pass into RGB, alpha into alpha, and make this into a single texture. So Shift A, and I will search for set alpha. I will load depth into the RGB and opacity alpha into alpha, and let's use the output. So Shift A. You can set the output path. I will just send this to temp. You can change the name like channel basket and load the set alpha into the output. And I can preview this image. If I search for channel packet, you see we have the depth pass in RGB and alpha is working okay. So now let's go to the character. Switch to main scene, and if I go to profile, we are using default height or default material alt. So I will load this in here, and this is the old texture. Let's switch to the channel packet. And new texture looks already quite okay, but we are still using old UV layout. If I load the texture. So we are using now this texture, but let's preview UVs. You see those UVs are not correct. So just as I mentioned, I will paste the UV data from the baking scene. And now let's preview the UVs. They look okay. However, we have to still tell the strands which of those UV boxes should be attached to which strands. So we'll go to the Deformers sub-hash systems, and we will have unfortunately go layer by layer. So this is the base strands. Search for UV region distribute, and it is using all UV regions. But if you want, you can manually pick the new UVs from new UV layout. Then I would have to repeat that for the second layer. Search for the UV region distribute. It is using box number 1. Let's preview that. And if you want, you can change this to maybe different one, or shift click to select multiple UV boxes, enter to accept. And now this is using new texture, new UV layout, and those UV regions are now assigned to strands. And we would have to repeat this everywhere. I could try to, for example, save time by copying the profile and pasting profile, but it looks like the settings are slightly different, so it does not look exactly the same like previous layout. Because you see we have width 002 and here 0013, so it is using slightly different settings. So that's why we may need to manually copy UVs. And same in here, I would manually copy UVs. If you are lucky, all your hair strands will use same profile, so you do not have to do this. And now it is just the same steps all over again. Go to base layer, search for UV region distribute, maybe pick a different region, enter to accept, and again second layer, UV region distribute. Let's check those UV regions. They seem to be okay, so I can maybe disable third, replace it with first, enter to accept, and you get the idea. So that is all about the texture baking. Now I will show you the basic deformers. So let's start by the noise deformer. Actually, I used this a few times already. So if the noise is too big, the first parameter to tweak is to reduce global size. And then you have control over the uniform amplitude per strand noise amplitude. So if I slowly increase per uniform amplitude, and you see we get this wavy behavior, you can change the frequency. Now if the noise is too big, it can clip through the head geometry. In that case, I would use the push out. This will move the high strands out of the surface. And then we have control over per strand noise, so we get unique noise distribution for each strand. And you can change also the influence range. So for example, if I increase this, we may only get a bit of noise on the very endings of the strands. Or if I switch this, for example, to quadratic curve, then I can set 0 noise on the root and tip, and then 100% in the center. Here I will show you the radius set. It is basically used to taper the strands. Usually I would keep the radius 1, and if you want to make the strands wider, I would suggest to change width in the profile. So we can change the taper shape with the influence range, flip that, or switch to, for example, quadratic curve, and maybe set this like so. In here I wanted to show you the align tilt, so now the strands are not really aligned too well to the surface. And if I add the tilt align to source surface, now it looks way better. There is also sometimes trouble when the hair cards are twisted. In that case, use twist fix. Now I will show you clamp effect. So for that we get the one hair system, and let's add the secondary one, maybe slightly denser. Now for the clamp effect to work, we have to have parent to the current hair system. So in the first system, I will assign p tag to those strands, and in the second system, I will use this p tag as parent. And now you see the interpolation works, and we can now use the clamp effect in the second system. So we get basically this effect. And the amount of clamps is driven by the amount of the parent strands. So if I change density of the parent strands, we get different amount of clamps. And you can always put some effects on the clamp, like noise, to make it less or more uniform. For example, with the offset gain, I could create kinda the effect of flyaway, depending on the settings. And in here, let's say we want to duplicate those strands, those single strand. So I will add Strand Filter. This won't generate new strands, but allow us to modify existing one. I will go to Generator, Duplicate Strands. You can change the amount of duplicated strands, change the radius, then you can change the distribution shape. You can also change the tip roundness. So now instead of the flat, there will be more like roundish. And even thickness works like that. And this is good. This works great if you combine with the clamp effect. If I invert the influence range, then go back to duplicate, maybe increase the radius, and after the clamp we can always add a noise effect and build this up to make it look more interesting. In here I will show you mirror. So let's again add Strand Filter, so we do not generate new strands. And I will add the mirror. So quite simple. There is the bisect option, which will remove the strands from the left and duplicate the right side to the left. So without with. If I flip the bisect effect, then the right side will be removed. So without mirror, with mirror. The bisect distance, if I set this to 1 centimeter, now the strands that are closer than 1 centimeter from center, there will be snapped into the center line. If you want different behavior, use clear mode instead. So now those strands will be removed from the center line. You can also pick different target mirror object if you want to mirror around some helper empty. In here I will show you how to trim the hair strands. So add the trim deformer. You can trim the root, trim the tip, and I would use often this with randomize. And you can also randomize the roots. But now you will see one issue. It looks like it does not work, since if we get random number and multiply by 0, we will get 0. So just increase root trim randomization, and then you can get increase root trim value, and then randomization will work. Roll strands, so let's add the roll deformer, and you can adjust the roll distance, roll radius, and if you want you can use different surface for roll direction. So then we get this kind of effect. You can also change the roll tangent direction and flip it with the roll direction. And lastly, There is, if you want, you can, for example, randomize this to make it look less even. And on top of that, when we roll along the surface, let me first update this roll deformer. You see now this new parameter, surface normal sample time. So sometimes when you have to pick which roll direction to use from the maybe tips or maybe from the root. So you can sample this normal using this surface normal sample time. So when this is 0, it will pick normal for roll direction at the root. If set to 1, it will pick normal from the tip and roll along this place. And in here I wanted to show you how to slide the points on the curve. It will be easier to see in the matcap view. So let's add slide points, and I will switch influence range to profile curve, so it will be easier to see how it works. So for example, with this kind of curve, we get the effect of denser roots and tips. If I flip this curve, then we get basically more points in the center. Then there is the scale option. Maybe I will modify slightly the object, and maybe let's add a bit more points. Okay, so let's add scale. And scale will make this shorter or longer, but in the uniform way. If you prefer, you can add lengthen. So this will kind of keep the curvature of the hair strands. However, this can make only the strands longer. If you want to make them shorter, then you would want to probably replace this with the trim. In here, I wanted to show you that often you may have some haircuts, and when you create hairline, you would want to manually fill those spots. But you can use for that purpose move to border. So there is move to border, and you see all the hair strands from the whole surface were moved to the closest border edge. It may be easier to see if I set influence range to constant. And so this is the effect. Now, usually you do not want to create hairline in this way. So what I would usually want to do is pick the strands that are close already to border and then just move them closer. We can achieve this effect by masking the input mask with border edge distance. And for example, let's say I want to move the strands only in the 3 centimeters. So I will set this to 0, 0, 3. And now the effect is inverted, so I will flip this mask. And let's see, without, with, without, with. So maybe even make this 5 centimeters. So without and with. And in here I will just quickly show you how to create one way to create braids. We have the guide curve attached to the surface. I will add Strand Generator on top. And now this hair strand is used as guide. I don't think it matters, but you can disable align to surface normal to get this kind of effect in the Strand Generator. So anyway, let's add the braid. And you see braid requires hair system to be set as child, so we have the guide as parent. And the braid is working okay. Maybe it is big, so I can reduce global size. And it looks like we do not have enough resolution on the strands, so I will bump up resolution, and that's basically how you create braid effect. Often you will want to use round profile instead of flat. So in the profile I will copy width, switch to circle, paste width, and that looks kinda okay. You can change the frequency, basic stuff. The more interesting parameter is how to make this less uniform. So for that I would just add a bit of noise, reduce the global size, and the noise is mostly applied on the tips, so I will invert influence range and then maybe set uniform noise to 0 and reduce per strand noise. It is up to you to play with the settings. Maybe change the influence range and without noise, with noise. So those are the most useful deformers. You can read about others in the documentation. Hopefully now you will understand 70 to 80% of how the hair tool works, and it should make it easier to create your own hairstyles. See ya.